Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen wa salatu wa salamu ala ashrafil anbiya'i wal mursaleen wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa ahli bayti tahiratihi ajma'in amma ba'd fa'a'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim bismillahir rahmanir rahim assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Just to give you a few minutes to collect yourselves before you participate inshallah, and also to see if we have anyone else to come, because I think we have plenty of time. I'll just recite one verse of Surat Al-Nisa from the beginning of your handout, and after that I'll just say a few introductory remarks. After that I'll say a few introductory remarks, and after that you are going to have to do most of the work. So be prepared, and be prepared to look carefully at the words in front of you. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها الناس اتقوا ربكم الذي خلقكم من نفس واحدة الذي خلقكم من نفس واحدة وخلق منها زوجها وبث منهما رجالا كثيرا ونساء واتقوا الله الذي تساءلون به والأرحام إن الله كان عليكم رقيبا آمنت بالله صدق الله مولانا العظيم وبلغنا رسوله النبي الكريم ونحن على ذلك لمن الشاهدين والشاكرين والحمد لله رب العالمين. Allah Ta'ala says to us in the Quran, وَرَتِّلِ الْقُرْآنَ تَرْتِيلًا, that we should recite the Quran with tartil, that we should have a slow recitation. And I think when you have heard a verse of the Quran recited in that way with tartil, it makes you focus on every word. And that is really the purpose of today's session, is that each of us looks at the words of the Quran very carefully to see what message we are taking away from the verses. Because the Quran is a very concise text, and firstly, nothing is wasted. There is nothing extra there. Everything has a purpose and a meaning. And secondly, the Quran communicates at many different levels. So if we miss some of these things, then we do not get the complete message. So we have to try as hard as we can to focus on every word, every term, and to understand how the Quran is communicating its message. This talk today was entitled, I think, something like Family Relations in the Quran, an Obligation or a Choice. And so the topic is obviously the importance of our family relationships and how that is dealt with in the Quran. But the question that I want you to focus on as we go through all of these verses is whether the Quran considers family relationships an obligation or a choice. So as we go through the verses, look for words which are giving you clues as to what the level of formality with which the Quran is explaining whether there is an obligation or whether we have a choice. And the reason I express it like this is because when we talk about our religion, we often think in terms of huququllah. Although we know this general classification of huququllah and huquq al-ibad, but our tendency is to see the Quran as a set of laws and regulations which emphasizes to us our duties towards Allah. So we think the Quran is law, we think that our deen is fara'id, and we think that that is relating to worship. When we talk about fard and wajib, we often think of prayer. When people say the salah is fard upon us, the fast is fard upon us, it's fard to go on hajj. So this language of obligation is usually associated with worship and duties that we owe to Allah. Whereas the social relationships that we have, in religious terms, we often talk about secondary texts. So we have the Adab al-Mufrad of Imam Bukhari rahmatullahi alayhi. Adab al-Mufrad is the text, as soon as you hear the word adab, which is manners, etiquettes, we think this is something now which is less obligatory. Adab is something which is like a gloss or a sheen. We think this is the icing on the cake. We don't think of that as an obligation. And on top of that, when we have texts like Adab al-Mufrad, although it contains gems, because we have the Sahih al-Bukhari and then we have Adab al-Mufrad, then people think, okay, so we have the Quran, which is the laws and regulations, which is very important. We have Sahih al-Bukhari, which has authenticated hadith, which will tell us how to fulfill our obligation. Then we have the Adab al-Mufrad, which is very low down in the hierarchy, is less authenticated, and it's narrations of the Prophet. So it becomes, in our mindset, we almost begin to think of this as less important. So we are thinking about etiquettes, we don't think of obligation. So that's why I want to bring you back to the primary source of Islam, Islamic law, but also of Islamic awareness, if you like, which is the Quran, and to look at the words of the Quran and to see whether Allah uses words of obligation or words of choice. Is it a choice? How we deal with our family. So that's the question in front of you. Keep that in mind as we go through the entire document, inshallah. So obviously I have selected verses for you which are relevant to this topic. So we will be going not systematically through one section of the Quran, but we will be taking different verses as we go through. And the first verse, which is, if you like, the seminal verse, the verse which I have selected to introduce the topic to you, is the first verse of Surat Al-Nisa, in which Allah Ta'ala says, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها الناس, O mankind, اتقوا ربكم, fear your Lord, الذي خلقكم, who created you, من نفس واحدة, from one soul, وخلق منها, and created from it, زوجها, its mate or its partner, وبث منهما رجالا كثيرا ونساء, and from those two he established and dispersed many men and women. وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ الَّذِي تَسَاءَلُونَ بِهِ وَالْأَرْحَامِ, fear Allah, through whom you ask one another. There are different explanations for this in the tafasir. One thing which is mentioned is that the Arabs, if they wanted to ask for something, they would invoke their kinship with someone. So if I ask you for, so for example, if we are blood relatives, for example, I want to ask them that for the sake of our kinship, I implore you to give me this or to do this to me or to be kind to me. So you call upon those relationships when you are asking each other. When you ask one another. Tasa'alun means that you are asking each other. This is a mutual grammatical form. It means I ask you, you ask me. When we have needs between us, we call upon that relationship of blood ties, this arham, the wombs. We call upon the relationships of the womb. إِنَّ اللَّهَ كَانَ عَلَيْكُمْ رَقِيبًا, and Allah is indeed over you an observer. And one very beautiful example of this, وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ الَّذِي تَسَاءَلُونَ بِهِ وَالْأَرْحَامِ, is in the Quran. Is Sayyidina Musa alayhi salam, when he comes down from the mountain and he finds that Bani Israel have been worshipping the cow, and he becomes very angry with his brother, Sayyidina Harun alayhi salam. And Harun alayhi salam says to him, Ya ibn umma, la ta'khudh bi lihyati wa la bi ra'si. He says, O son of my mother, do not hold me by the beard or by the head. Now at that time, the key thing was that he didn't want him to hold him in this way. I mean, this is quite a hold. He's certainly taking him to task. He's a prophet of Allah, mind you. Sayyidina Harun alayhi salam is a prophet of Allah. And when he was selected for that task, Musa alayhi salam said, "Huwa afsahu minni." He's more eloquent than me. So Musa alayhi salam has acknowledged that he is a prophet who is asked for Allah to bestow him with prophethood. And then he's also said he's my brother. And he's also said here, "Huwa afsahu minni." He's more eloquent than me as well. So having praised him, having selected him, he is now holding him by the beard and the hair in anger at what has been done in his absence. Now Harun alayhi salam could have just said, "Don't do this to me. Don't humiliate me in front of people. Don't hold me in this way." But he wanted Musa alayhi salam to listen. He wanted him to, because he knew he's very angry. Something has been done which is wrong in his absence. He has to appease his anger. So at that time he calls upon the relationship between them. Now he could have said, "Oh my brother." It would have been the same meaning if he had said, "Oh my brother." I mean, we are related to each other. There is blood between us. So don't hold me in this way. I'm your brother after all. And he's an elder brother as well. So he had many things he could have called upon. But he didn't call upon any of that. He said, "Son of my mother." Very carefully chosen words. Normally when you talk to your brother, you don't say "son of my mother." But this was a desperate situation. It was an extreme situation. It wasn't enough for him to say that "you are my brother" or "I am your brother." He said, "Remember that your mother is my mother as well. So we have the same mother. You are the son of my mother." So he reminded him not just that they are brothers, but he said, "Remember what being a brother means. A brother means that we have shared a womb. That you came from the same womb that I came from. We have shared a womb. Your mother is my mother." So he called him "son of my mother." And that appeased the anger. What we see after that is that Musa alayhi salam goes in a different direction. He turns, "Samiri, what happened to you?" He turns towards the others after that. There's no mention of him saying anything else to Harun alayhi salam after this. So he calls him "son of my mother." So when Allah Ta'ala says, وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ الَّذِي تَسَاءَلُونَ بِهِ, that you ask each other about these wombs, in the name of these womb relationships, I wanted to just give you that one example. So when you look at this verse, what clues do you obtain from this regarding whether Allah Ta'ala considers that people should treat relationships of kin as an obligation or a choice? What terms, what language, what structure here is giving you an impression about how Allah Ta'ala wants us to consider this topic in terms of its obligatory nature or its voluntary nature?
Mentions fear twice.
Yeah.
Which implies, to me at least, that there's more of an obligation element than there is a choice.
Mm-hmm. And so we have the term ittaqu. Ittaqu. Ittaqu rabbakum. And we have wattaqullah. So ittaqu is saying that you should fear. And what does fear mean? What does that imply? If you just take it to the end, just to continue the point. So fear, obviously, yes, it implies obligation.
Pay due respect to Allah.
Yeah, but so just continue the point. What does it
You
imply?
should be wary of not carrying out what is envisaged for you, that there's negative circumstance that may arise if you do not follow
So
through.
consequences.
Yeah.
So when Allah Ta'ala says ittaqullah in the Quran, He is stressing to us that there will be accountability, that there will be consequences. So accountability arises from obligation. If we don't read nafil, there isn't accountability. That's voluntary. But if we miss the fard, there is accountability because there is obligation. So accountability implies obligation. So 2 mentions in one verse of ittaqullah, fear Allah, means that you should fear Allah. Why? Because of the accountability that may ensue from your failure to comply with what Allah Ta'ala is saying here. Also, Rabbakum here, Rabb is implying, when Allah Ta'ala says Rabb, He is implying that He has a claim over you. If you like, He has jurisdiction over you. So He says, Ittaqu Rabbakum. It means, fear the one who sustains you. So He is claiming His jurisdiction here as well. That He is right, and this is the first time. The second time He says, Wattaqullah. So the first time He says, Ittaqu, He is claiming He's staking His claim here. That He is the Rabb. That you are sustained because of Him. He has every right to command you. He has every right to entail consequences as a result of your failures. Okay, so we have 2 mentions of fear Allah. Anything else that we have here? Anything else in this verse before we move to other verses? And ladies, you will have to work because the numbers are such that we need everyone involved. Yes, Sister Zon.
Through whom you ask one another, so that's a choice. It's not a command. You're requesting. So it's a choice.
So tasa'aluna bihi is a choice. But I think here, the point which is being made is that you وَاتَّقُوا الَّذِي تَسَاءَلُونَ بِهِ, you ask for the sake of Allah. So that means that sometimes when you say for the sake of Allah, وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ الَّذِي تَسَاءَلُونَ بِهِ, you ask for the sake of Allah. The asking is a choice, for sure, if you have requests or you don't have requests. But I think in terms of the actual obligation here, the actual point which is the subject of the verse is more about the arham themselves. Is whether you make requests of each other is voluntary. But in terms of, because it says, وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ الَّذِي تَسَاءَلُونَ بِهِ وَالْأَرْحَامَ.
So the choice becomes an obligation because you're putting ittaqullah, fear Allah. So it's rather than a request then that you can accept or decline. Allah saying ittaqullah, fear Allah, which means granted.
Yeah.
For the sake of Allah.
Yeah. Yes. Exactly. That you should respect. I mean, when you ask in His name, then you should respect His command. You should fear Him. You should fear the consequences as well. That you invoke Him when you want something. When you desire something, you invoke Allah, then you should have respect for Allah as well, when Allah commands you. What about the last part of the verse? إِنَّ اللَّهَ كَانَ عَلَيْكُمْ رَقِيبًا.
He's always watching.
What does that mean?
He's always present.
Yeah. But what's the effect in the verse? What's the purpose? We know what it means in the word. What's the effect in the verse?
So do not take it lightly, your life.
It means,
you're accountable to everything.
yes. So that accountability is ever present. Meaning that when Allah says ittaqullah, He is reinforcing ittaqullah by saying, and remember that Allah is always watching over you. Not just ittaqullah for a second and then move on to do whatever you want to do. But when He said ittaqullah, this is an ever-present obligation. In Surat Al-Jum'ah, Allah Ta'ala says that you should come for the prayer and then disperse in the land, seek your rizq, and He says, وَاتَّقُوا after that. And He also says, وَاذْكُرُوا اللَّهَ وَاذْكُرُوا اللَّهَ كَثِيرًا لَعَلَّكُمْ تُفْلِحُونَ there. وَاذْكُرُوا اللَّهَ كَثِيرًا لَعَلَّكُمْ. He says, remember Allah a great deal, meaning that even when you go out into the world, remembering Allah is an ever-present obligation. Meaning He didn't ask you just to come to the prayer and remember Him and then go. He said, when you go, then وَاذْكُرُوا اللَّهَ كَثِيرًا. So even when you are going about your business, remembering Allah is a continuous obligation. So here when He said, إِنَّ اللَّهَ كَانَ عَلَيْكُمْ رَقِيبًا, He means that this fearing Allah is a continuous obligation, not just for a moment in time.
Even in Surat Hashr also. 2 times. Taqullah in one ayat. Ya ayyuhal ladhina amanu.
Usually when he is asking us, telling us to do something.
Yeah.
Usually. So this is a continuous obligation. And in terms of the unity here, the message of unity overall, because the Quran communicates on different levels. So at the same time as emphasizing the importance of the subject, it's also creating an environment as well. That it creates a concept for us, a concept of unity as well. By saying, Ya ayyuhan nas. As soon as he begins the verse is Ya ayyuhan nas. All of mankind. So how are we a collective? We are a collective by common ancestry. So as soon as he uses the term Ya ayyuhan nas, we know that he has linked us all together in one, through common ancestry. And then he said, Min nafsin wahida. So again he reinforces the concept of unity. Again he reinforces the concept of unity, one soul, that you're all created from one soul. And then he talks about man and woman. So now you have the 2 genders. And he says from them, all of the people have been dispersed. So he starts with unity and he spreads that into the whole of mankind. So that in this way, our thinking in this verse is guided towards unity. Common origins. That we are all one, Ya ayyuhan nas, common identity, common ancestry, nafsin wahida, one soul, man and woman, teamwork between the genders. And from that, we have all of this abundance, multiplicity, population growth, etc. If you take this term, this verse, وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ الَّذِي تَسَاءَلُونَ بِهِ وَالْأَرْحَامِ. So you have 2 propositions, you have A and B. Wa in the middle, you have wa. So we have wa and, as a sort of a balance here, we have a fulcrum here. On the one hand, one expression is وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ الَّذِي تَسَاءَلُونَ بِهِ. And here we have وَالْأَرْحَامِ. What does that tell you about the weight attached to that? So if you look at the 2 propositions, here he says, fear Allah in whose name you ask each other. And here he said, and the wombs, wal-arham, the relationships of kin. You see how he balanced the 2 expressions. He gives it weight. When you put something next to something like wattaqullah, it gives it weight. When you have La ilaha illallah and then you have Muhammadur Rasulullah, it gives it weight. That Allah has put a statement in which He said He is one God, and next to it He has put that Muhammad is Rasulullah. He's given it weight by putting the 2 things alongside. He's balanced them as if to say that just as this is true, this is true. So he says, just as you should fear Allah in whose name you invoke each other, you should also have respect for the relationships of the womb. He gives it weight. Okay, I think that's given people a chance to come in as well, so I've dealt with that one slowly, and we'll speed up a little bit now. So we have now the story of Yusuf alayhi salam in the Quran, Joseph in the Quran, yes? So we have some verses here which are towards the end of the surah. Obviously we all know the story of Yusuf alayhi salam and how he suffered injustice at the hands of his brothers and betrayal as well at the hands of his brothers. And the fact that they took him saying that they would look after him. So there was dishonesty, there was betrayal, there was injustice. Many different wrongs were committed there. They took him saying we will look after him, took him away. Then not only do they harm him, but they lie about what has happened to him. And then they put him down the well, which is again a scary thing for any child, young child at that time. And then, as a consequence of their actions, he suffers further injustice by being sold into slavery. So he's lost his freedom, he's lost his family, he's obviously terrified also potentially in that situation. We would be, were it not for the protection Allah gave him. So many different injustices were committed. So all of the story unfolds. And then towards the end of the surah, then we have Yusuf alayhi salam talking to his brothers now, with the tables turned, with him in a position of power and them in a position of need. And at this point, they don't yet know who he is. And he says to them, قَالَ هَلْ عَلِمْتُمْ مَا فَعَلْتُمْ بِيُوسُفَ وَأَخِيهِ إِذْ أَنْتُمْ جَاهِلُونَ. Do you know what you did with Joseph and his brother when you were ignorant? Then they realize, for whatever reason, the Mufassirin give different possible explanations. قَالُوا أَإِنَّكَ لَأَنْتَ يُوسُف. Are you actually Yusuf? He says, قَالَ أَنَا يُوسُف وَهَذَا أَخِي. Yes, I am Yusuf and this is my brother. قَدْ مَنَّ اللَّهُ عَلَيْنَا. Allah has been very beneficent towards us. Beneficent towards us. إِنَّهُ مَنْ يَتَّقِ وَيَصْبِرْ فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُضِيءُ أَجْرَ الْمُحْسِنِينَ. Whoever fears Allah and is patient, then Allah does not waste the reward of those who do good. قَالُوا تَاللَّهِ لَقَدْ آثَرَكَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْنَا وَإِن كُنَّا لَخَاطِئِينَ. So then they say, surely Allah has preferred you over us. They realize now His superiority, that dream, which they were jealous of Him for, that the 11 stars, the sun and the moon will bow before Him. They realize now that He has been put on a pedestal. They can literally see Him on a platform. It's revealed before them. وَإِن كُنَّا لَخَاطِئِينَ. Now we are surely wrongdoers. قَالَ لَا تَثْرِيبَ عَلَيْكُمُ الْيَوْمِ. He said, no blame will there be upon you today. يَغْفِرُ اللَّهُ لَكُمْ هُوَ أَرْحَمُ الرَّاحِمِينَ. May Allah forgive you. He is the most merciful of the merciful. A few verses on, this is verse 89 to 92. At verse 100, Yusuf alayhi salam puts his parents on the throne, raises them onto the throne, and we have the brothers also there. And then all of the brothers, the mother, the father, all bowing before him. And he says, oh my father, this is the explanation of my vision before. يا أبت هذا تأويل رؤياي من قبل قد جعلها ربي حقا. That Allah has made this dream come true. وقد أحسن بي إذ أخرجني من السجن وجاء بكم من البدو. So he says that Allah has favored me when He took me out of the when He has taken me out of the prison. Then he says, مِن بَعْدِ أَن نَزَغَ الشَّيْطَانُ بَيْنِي وَبَيْنَ إِخْوَتِي. After the Satan-induced estrangement, it says in this translation, نَزَغَ الشَّيْطَانُ بَيْنِي وَبَيْنَ إِخْوَتِي. That he put this dispute in between me and my brothers, he says. نَزَغَ الشَّيْطَانُ. إِنَّ رَبِّي لَطِيفٌ لِمَا يَشَاءُ. Allah is very subtle in what He does. إِنَّهُ هُوَ الْعَلِيمُ الْحَكِيمُ. So He is the most knowledgeable and He is the wise, or the one who makes the best decisions. So what do we take away from this cluster of verses here in terms of what we are told about this situation? So this is Yusuf alayhi salam coming now into contact with the brothers who have wronged him, and how he deals with that and what is said about the phrasing in the Quran. This story of Yusuf alayhi salam, in the Quran, Allah Ta'ala said that there are lessons in this story for all who seek them. Ibrah, that there is much to learn in the story of Yusuf alayhi salam. So obviously when Allah Ta'ala is giving us this information, He wants us to pay attention and to take heed from this. What should we take away? So with regard to the question about the importance or the obligation or the voluntary nature of family relationships, what do we take from this?
That Allah will be the one to give forgiveness to those that have done wrong to their families, that they won't be blamed. So I find it interesting that it's not He forgives them, Allah forgives them.
So, does He forgive them?
I don't think He does. He seems almost grateful for the pain because it's brought him to a situation which is positive as a result of the pain. But then He leaves the forgiveness in the hands of Allah, and He doesn't sort of give it to His brothers Himself.
You know, in fact, when Yaqub alayhi salam is asked to pray for forgiveness, he says, I will presently. So astaghfirullah. He says, I will in the future.
Yeah, he didn't really say that.
there's a delay. But Yusuf alayhi salam here, لا تثريب عليكم اليوم, there is no vengeance upon you or no blame upon you on this day. That, I think from him, because it says qala, he said. So in verse 92, لا تثريب عليكم اليوم. This is a very famous expression because he is implying there will be no retribution. Meaning, because he's in a position of power. You have to look at the dynamics there. You have a position of power. They're very much cap in hand, asking him for, food and so on in the famine situation. And he is completely in control. The guards are at his disposal, as we know from the story of Yusuf. That the guards are at his disposal, the soldiers, everyone. He is on a platform there. So he is in power. Then he has everyone at his disposal. If he wants to wreak vengeance there was no one to stop him. So for him to then say, قَالَ لَا تَثْرِيبَ عَلَيْكُمُ الْيَوْمِ, then there's no vengeance or blame upon you today, no retribution. I'm not going to call you to account for what you did. I think it's probably indicating his forgiveness of them, or at least his non-requital of them, for what they have done. Because remember, they've only just realized that he is Yusuf. And they're quite incredulous. قَالُوا أَإِنَّكَ لَأَنْتَ يُوسُف? Is it really you? I mean, أَإِنَّكَ and لَأَنْتَ, there's two, you, with emphasis as well. They're quite incredulous. Like, can you really be in this situation after, the way we left you? And after all these years? And in this different land, the land has changed, the time has changed, your situation has changed. Can it really be you? So he says, "Allah تَثْرِيبَ عَلَيْكُمُ الْيَوْمِ," there's no vengeance upon you. This phrase is the phrase which the Prophet ﷺ, and remember the Quran was sent for the instruction of the Prophet and his followers in its time, as well as for our instruction in later years. This is the phrase which the Prophet ﷺ used at the Kaaba at the conquest of Mecca. When he addressed the Makkans and asked them, what expectation do you have from me today? And he said to them then, he said, I say to you what my brother Yusuf said to his brothers, لا تثريب عليكم اليوم. So this is a message really to the Prophet ﷺ, that this is how you should deal with people who have wronged you, that you shouldn't take vengeance upon them. And the mention of Allah, he says after that, يَغْفِرُ اللَّهُ لَكُمْ. So he makes dua for them. Yaqub al-Islam says, I will make dua for them. When he's asked to make dua, he says, I will. But Yusuf al-Islam doesn't hesitate. He says, يَغْفِرُ اللَّهُ لَكُمْ. May Allah forgive you. So he makes dua for them on the spot. As soon as they have said, وَإِن كُنَّا لَخَاطِئِينَ, we did wrong, he says, لَا تَثْرِيبَ عَلَيْكُمُ الْيَوْمِ يَغْفِرُ اللَّهُ لَكُمْ. As soon as they confess, he says, there's no vengeance, no retribution, may Allah forgive you. So when he says, there's no لَا تَثْرِيبَ عَلَيْكُمُ الْيَوْمِ, he says, I'm not going to take any vengeance from you. Then he says, يَغْفِرُ اللَّهُ لَكُمْ, I pray that Allah will not take any vengeance from you. So he has absolved.
He has forgiven them.
Yeah, well, he has not just forgiven them, he's absolved them of retribution in this world from him and his guards, and in the hereafter from Allah's ultimate retribution as well, by praying for his forgiveness. And then, having made that dua, he says, وَهُوَ أَرْحَمُ الرَّاحِمِينَ. This is how, when you invoke Allah's mercy, he is asking Allah indirectly that make this dua of forgiveness complete, meaning answer this call. So not only is he asking Allah to forgive him, but he's imploring Allah to accept that dua by saying, Huwa arhamur rahimin. He is the most merciful of the merciful. So when I say, Yaghfirullahu lakum, I'm asking Allah to look favorably upon this dua of mine. I'm hoping it will be accepted. So really, I mean, the thing that strikes me here is about how quick the forgiveness is, and how drawn out the wrongs were. This is a child taken from his family in a very young age, and all the way to maturity, and along the way he suffers so many trials and tribulations, so years of hardship, decades of hardship, different hardships. We have all of the things which I mentioned before in his childhood, then we have being sold into slavery, then we have the issue of his puberty and the things which followed after that, when he becomes a man, the betrayal there as well, the imprisonment, wrongful imprisonment. Any one of these things would be enough to make ordinary people bitter for the rest of their lives. They would want vengeance for any one of these things. He has a catalogue of wrongs which have been committed against him, all of which he can trace back to the actions of his brothers. He can attribute all of that. If he's look at the chain of causation, he can go all of that back to his brothers. And look how instantaneous the forgiveness is. As soon as they say, وَإِن كُنَّا لَخَاطِئِينَ قَالَ لَا تَثْرِيبَ عَلَيْكُمُ الْيَوْمَ يَغْفِرُ اللَّهُ لَكُمْ وَهُوَ أَرْحَمُ الرَّاحِمِينَ. It's instantaneous and it's complete forgiveness. And what's the key behind all of this? What is the key to all this forgiveness that you can see in this passage? What jumps out as you?
Don't misuse the authority.
That's fine, yeah. That's relevant, yes. Yes?
We blame Shaitan.
Yes. And that's
rather than
very...
others'
Yes.
reactions.
That's right. And this is very interesting that, this is recorded in the Quran. Nothing in the Quran is excess. Here Allah Ta'ala is giving us dialogue. This isn't reported speech. This isn't the third person saying, and then this happened, and then this happened, and this is the story of Joseph, and this is what happened to him. Allah is bringing that scene to life and recording it in the Quran so that we have access to the words. Imagine, if you want to get to the bottom of a situation, what happened nowadays? What will we look for? We look for transcripts. Interview transcript. What was said? Even if it's recorded, what do they do with the recording? They transcribe it. So you can see it all written down. This was said, and this was said, and you can read this was said. And everything, that's evidence, isn't it? Then that will be considered evidence. So what did you say? What did you mean by that? So Allah has recorded for us in the Quran not only what happened in terms of events, but He has recorded for us the words that were said at the time, so that we can see through the dialogue how the individuals expressed themselves, what their thoughts were at the time. And from that we get insight into the minds of those individuals. When you see someone speak, when you hear someone speak, you get insight into the mind of that individual.
You describe to Prophet.
But he's taking us inside the mind of Yusuf alayhi salam and the mind of the brothers and so on. He's giving us access to their way of thinking. Why is he doing that? Because he says there's ibrah in this, that we have to learn from this. He wants us to become like this. He wants the Prophet ﷺ to learn from this as well. Even though he is the greatest and the final of messengers, he's giving him an example. He's saying these are role models, the prophets, how they dealt with these challenges that they faced. He wants us to understand their mindset, their thinking, their dialogue, their speech, so that we can emulate it. He's giving us detail here. This isn't general. This isn't generally, okay, be good people, be forgiving. This is showing us how it was done, what was endured, and what was expressed. If you read this passage, what comes across from this is shukr for Allah, shukr towards Allah and forgiveness towards creation. Bitterness would be that he would say that terrible things happen to me, I will never forgive anyone. He does exactly the opposite. He thanks Allah for every blessing. The first thing he says, I am Yusuf and this is my brother. He says, قَدْ مَنَّ اللَّهُ عَلَيْنَا. If any one of you had endured a fraction of these hardships, would you have said Allah had blessed you?
No.
Man means that he has been extremely beneficent towards us. He's blessed us so much. This is the word Allah Ta'ala uses for the blessing of sending the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. He said, لَقَدْ مَنَّ اللَّهُ عَلَى الْمُؤْمِنِينَ إِذْ بَعْثَ فِيهِمْ رَسُولًا. When Allah sent the messenger to the believers, He said, لَقَدْ مَنَّ اللَّهُ عَلَى الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. That's the word man. It's a great favor. You don't use that word for ordinary everyday things. Something really special happens, you said man. He said, قَدْ مَنَّ اللَّهُ عَلَيْنَا. He has bestowed us with so many blessings. Yes?
So on that same ayah, it's quite interesting because he says to all the brothers, they said, are you with Joseph? He said, I am Joseph, he is my brother. So he's saying that to all the brothers, but he's highlighting Binyamin, my akhi, who got apprehended for the crime. He said, Binyamin is my akhi, my brother, because they share the same womb. And he's saying that to the
Yes.
other brothers.
True. No, that's true. That's an interesting point. They obviously have common father, but not common mother. So he's singling him out because those two. Yes, it's an interesting point actually. That he's almost saying he is my brother in a special way, but also because the conduct is different. Because he and Benjamin have been on the receiving end of what has been meted out by the others. So in a way, he's quite kind of saying that yes, you've wronged me, and you've also wronged this brother. And Allah has blessed us. But yeah, you're right, that He singled him out because he has an extra level of kinship with him, that's true. And he said, فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُضِيعُ أَجْرَ الْمُحْسِنِينَ. And so we have the instantaneous nature of the forgiveness. Then the point about Satan here. It says, مِن بَعْدِ أَنْ نَزَغَ الشَّيْطَانُ بَيْنِي وَبَيْنَ إِخْوَتِي. After Shaitan, Satan, induced estrangement between me and my brothers. So by doing this, what does he achieve by saying that this was Satan's work? What does this achieve? Does it create room for forgiveness? And if so, how?
Does it absolve the
Yeah.
action?
Yeah, absolve is a very good word. I mean, what he's doing is really directing blame away from them. Just like he said, "La tathriba alaykum al-yawm," no blame, no retribution, but also no blame upon you. And he embodied that in his words. He didn't just say there's no blame upon you. He's shown it. You can see it through his words. But he says that Shaitan induced distance and rancor between me and my brothers.
Not your parents, that's right.
He didn't say my brothers did anything. He's saying my brothers and I were there minding our own business. No one did anything wrong. And then Shaitan came between us. How he turned the blame from the brothers onto Shaitan, an independent entity, if you like, a third party. So he doesn't allow blame to touch his brothers because there is that sense, it's as if he's pointing the finger at himself. He's saying, well, they're my blood. So it's as if I'm blaming myself then. So me and my brothers are on the same side. So the blame has to go elsewhere. So in a way, he's giving them refuge in his house after they have harmed him by saying, well, they're my family. They were always close to me, but the Shaitan came between us. So he externalizes the cause of the dispute. He doesn't allow it to be between him and his brothers, so that there is no scope for confrontation or rancor between him and his own family members. He externalizes that to Shaitan. There's another point about the use of Shaitan here. If you think about Allah and the message of the Quran, the language of the Quran, what does it achieve? We said, ittaqullah. What does this do here? When it says, nazagha shaitan. Shaitan is the fa'il here. He is the one, he's the subject of this verb, nazagha. So shaitan, he's the fa'il. He is the subject of this verb, of this sentence here. What does that achieve?
Created unity between brothers.
Yeah, but what does the use of the word shaitan, what does it conjure up in your mind? When you, in the Quran, when you're reading, you see something shaitan, what does it make you think?
Bad,
Bad.
evil.
You know when it talks about alcohol in the Quran, it says, "Rijsum min amali shaitan." It's uncleanliness from the work of Satan. Does it make you feel like drinking alcohol? Rijsun min amali shaitan. It's like it's unclean and it's the work of Satan. What does that make you want to do? Come near it?
Hate it.
Run from it. Hate it. It creates hatred inside you. The Quran is a book of guidance. So the Quran is it's not a rule book, although there are rules in it. So it's not saying do this, don't do this, do this, don't do this, but it creates a feeling inside you, guides you. So it tells you to do things, but it also makes you feel like doing things. It plays with your feelings. It turns you away from things and it draws you towards other things. It's called tarheeb and targheeb. So tarheeb is when Allah scares you from things. So when He says, ittaqullah, He is saying, don't go near that, or don't do this. But when He says, and here again, shaitan is used for the same purpose. Yeah.
This association of bad action from a family member being associated and put onto shaitan, practically, in everyday life, say you don't have day-to-day contact with members of your family, your brothers, your sisters, your mum, your father, but there are people who you become close to, not that become blood relations, but you entrust, you treat them essentially as more than friends. They're in the in-between, people that you may work with, people that you see outside of work. Can you make the same association, or is this simply reserved for people who are blood relations?
Concepts of forgiveness obviously do apply in general relationships too, but I think what we're getting here is something which is on a higher level. So good conduct is for everyone, forgiveness is for everyone, preserving relationships is for everyone. When you say Ya ayyuhan nas, it means you're all related at some level. But so at one level, we are all related as human beings. But the bond here that we're talking about is arham, wombs. So he's trying to make us understand that these are special relationships. So if you have, for example, in your organization, you have different clients, for example. There are some clients you will say, oh, I'll never let go of these. So you'll give them extra care. They're your longest standing clients, for example. They're special relationships. That's in a work context. But here in a personal context, Allah is saying these are special relationships. When you talk about brothers and sisters, you are talking about people you have shared a womb with. So it's not like roommates, it's wombmates. So it's, if you live with someone in a room, sometimes as a student, they become your friend for the rest of your life. Sometimes you hate them for the rest of your life, but it depends how you get on. But this sharing of something makes you close. Here he's saying, look, you've shared the same womb. You've been nourished by the same mother. That is a tie. It's inhuman for you to break that. So the consequences are greater because Allah is going to hold you to account for this. This is something which goes to the very essence of humanity, of your being a human being. If you cut ties of blood, then it questions your humanity in the way the Quran is communicating. This is why he is saying, that when things come between brothers, this is from the shaitan. He is making us understand that this is nothing to do with Allah. That this is the work of the shaitan. Shaitan is the opposing force to Allah in the Quran. So if something is from the shaitan, then this is something we have to run a mile from. This is misguidance. This is everything that will take you towards hell. Whilst everything Allah tells you is what takes you towards heaven. He is trying to make you feel distaste for such actions. First of all, that you shouldn't be putting enmity between two brothers. If you are a third person and you are trying to create an argument between two brothers. For example, if you are aware that one brother has said something negative about another brother, and you go to him and you'll never guess what he said, then you think twice, because he says, Amal shaitan, I don't want to do this. And also in terms of you and your brother, that you are quicker to forgive, and you don't consider, if you like, that I might not. It's something that you have almost to. You can see the alacrity with which he responds here, Yusuf al-Islam. Very, very quick to forgive here. I don't know if I answered your question entirely, but I want to. I think I just move on with those thoughts in mind. So the next passage. Just keeping one eye on the clock. So the next passage is from Surat Al-Ra'd. So these, I've just done these in sequence as they come in the Quran. So we had the Surah number 4, we had Surat Al-Nisa, then we had Surah number 12, now we have Surah number 13. So it shouldn't be lost on you that this surah comes after Surah Yusuf. This is also important. You had a question, I'm sorry.
No, I was just saying that we were talking about the love of forgiveness. We also believe that nothing can happen to anybody in the world if Allah doesn't want to. So Hazrat Yusuf was on that level where he thinks that if something has happened to it, it definitely was Allah's will. But that was his special relationship with Allah. That has given him that sakina and peace that he can see that thing, that's the shaitan that causing the things to happen between him and his brother. So if we have to do that, first we have to build a relationship strong with Allah. And then we can defeat shaitan. That's what I'm going to add in that.
Yeah, so he's able to accept what has happened, but not allow it to. And also, I think you have to think about the objective. It takes a lot to actually get over what has happened, to think about the objective. So he's thinking, what is my objective? In here, I mean, his objective is really Yusuf al-Islam, what the wrong that was done, was he was separated from his family. So if he then breaks off from them and says, you treated me horribly, I'm now never going to speak to you again, in effect, he's fulfilled that he has, the fragmentation has occurred. So the very thing that he didn't want will happen as a consequence of his action. So what he's done is he's risen above that and rectified the situation. He looked at what was the real objective here. The real objective was to avoid the fragmentation and reunite the family. So he's able to overlook the event to think about the real objective of uniting the family, which he would have wanted in the first place, and to preserve that objective even when his nafs might have been saying something else to him. So that's why it's important to externalize the cause of the dispute, because otherwise sometimes you forget what was the thing I really wanted. Sometimes we feel like with family, you think, oh, well, I'm not happy because he did that, and I wouldn't expect a family member to do that. So in essence, what you're really saying is, I do love that person, but I wanted them to treat me better. So if you respond by treating them badly because they treated you badly, in a way you've created the very divide that you didn't want. So he's risen above that here to get to the true objective. So what's interesting here is we have surah number 12, which is a story of a family and their relationships. Then we have surah number 13 immediately afterwards, which has some verses which are relating to family membership. So always think about the arrangement in the Quran as well. Because we have to look, sometimes we have practice, sometimes we have theory. Sometimes the Quran will say something very concisely. And in the next surah it will expand the whole topic. And sometimes it will give you a story about a topic, and sometimes it will give you instructions about a topic. And so it will come at you in different ways. But it's a common theme being reinforced in different ways. So here we have Surah Al-Ra'd. Those people who fulfill the covenant of Allah and do not break the contract. I'll just read the translation quickly. And those who join that which Allah has ordered to be joined and fear their Lord and are afraid of the evil of their account. And those who are patient, seeking the countenance of their Lord, and establish prayer and spend from what we have provided for them secretly and publicly and prevent evil with good, those will have the good consequence of this home, gardens of perpetual residence. They will enter them with whoever were righteous among their fathers, their spouses, and their descendants. And the angels will enter upon them from every gate, saying, peace be upon you for what you patiently endured, and excellent is the final abode. But those who break the covenant of Allah after contracting it, and sever that which Allah has ordered to be joined and spread corruption on earth, for them is the curse, and they will have the worst home. So, what kind of things jump out at you here? This is a passage about akhirah, about the rewards of heaven and hell, and what kind of terminology here is jumping out at you regarding family relationships and whether they are considered obligatory in the Quran or not considered obligatory in the Quran.
Patience.
Patience. وَالَّذِينَ صَبَرُوا ابْتِغَاءَ وَجْهِهِ. Those who are patient, seeking the countenance. Yeah, so patience is the important quality which is highlighted here. And sabr actually is one of those words which is used in the Quran many, many times, and often it's used for the Prophet ﷺ.
And kindness as well, you know.
Kindness.
Because kindness always brings people towards Islam. If you see the last verse of this page, it tells you that you have to, you should follow Allah, but you should not be kind, and you should not try to follow the people who are against Allah. But when they repent, you should make things easier for them. So here it draws a line as well between obligation and choice. Where it's an obligation and where it's a choice.
Which verse are you looking at?
The last one, the one you were asking the question. You know, all the answers are also in the last verse of this page.
On
Surah
page 3?
Al-Nisa, the last verse.
On page 3?
We haven't reached there yet.
Ah, okay, the last
Because
one.
you're asking the
Ah,
question,
last
I think the
verse.
answer
Okay,
is
yeah,
there.
Yeah.
yeah.
How we should behave with them and where we should not, where we should separate ourselves from a relationship when they're asking us to disobey Allah.
Yeah. So just staying with the passage that we have for now, just stay with that for a little while. And what jumps out at you here, in terms of the language used, for example. What do you think of the terminology?
You've got the covenant of Allah, contract, and then all the obligatory things that we understand as
Yeah.
well. So they're binding, things
Yeah.
that are binding
Exactly. So, I mean, it's like we
reach
have...
them, then
Yeah.
there are consequences.
Consequences. So again, the reference to binding agreements indicates consequences, sanctions, just as we had from ittaqullah. And doesn't it add a level of solemnity as well, gravity to the whole situation? If I say to you, I'll do something for you tomorrow, then you're not going to, hold it against me if I don't. You might phone me up and say, what happened to that thing you said you would do? But if we sign an agreement saying that we'll do something and then I don't do it, that will be a different situation. So there's a solemnity and a gravity, a sense of obligation that you have undertaken some responsibility here. That language is being used here in connection with the maintenance of relationships. الَّذِينَ يُوفُونَ بِعَهْدِ اللَّهِ, who are loyal to the covenant of Allah. وَلَا يَنْقُضُونَ الْمِيثَاقَ, do not break the contract. So these are people who fulfill their agreements. When they say something, they do it. They do those things. They fulfill obligations which are incumbent upon them. They respect obligations which are mandatory upon them. وَالَّذِينَ يَصِلُونَ. Now this الَّذِينَ here is very important, because الَّذِينَ means those who. Ismul Mawsul. It connects things. And the things which are connected, you have to look at them to see why they are being connected together. Whenever you see alladhina, you look at what's before and what's after, and why is Allah connecting them? So he says, those people who respect the covenant with Allah, the ahdillah. Can you imagine a covenant made with Allah, how important that is? So people who do that, and وَلَا يَنْقُضُونَ الْمِيثَاقَ, they don't break contracts. وَالَّذِينَ يَثِلُونَ. So they are the same people who respect Allah's agreements made with Allah, who respect contractual agreements. They are the same people, وَالَّذِينَ يَصِلُونَ مَا أَمَرَ اللَّهُ بِهِ أَن يُوصَلَ. They are the people who join what Allah has ordered. Amara, He is commanded. Can you imagine the command of Allah? Amara Allah. If you wanted something to be important in the Quran, what other language could you use? When He said, وَقَضَى رَبُّكَ أَلَّا تَعْبُدُوا إِلَّا إِيَّاهُ وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا. وَقَضَى means He has decreed. The qadi is the one who passes sentence on someone. He has absolute jurisdiction to pass sentence on someone. He's qada, He has decreed. So here He said, Amar Allah. Allah has ordered. This is an order from Allah. So this is very important. And He says, وَالَّذِينَ يَصِلُونَ مَا أَمْرَ. So they join what Allah has ordered to be joined. And He said, وَيَخْشَوْنَ رَبَّهُمْ. They fear their Lord. So fearing your Lord means also fearing accountability from your Lord. وَيَخَافُونَ سُوءَ الْحِسَابِ. And they fear a terrible reckoning. If you read this verse, actually, it's full of language which emphasizes obligation, almost to a level which is unnatural. If it wasn't Quran, you almost couldn't do this. Almost impossibly layered in terms, almost every word is loaded with meaning. الَّذِينَ يُوفُونَ وَفَى أَحْدِ contract with Allah. وَلَا يَنْقُضُونَ الْمِيثَاقَ, not breaking contracts. وَالَّذِينَ يَصِلُونَ مَا أَمَرَ اللَّهُ بِهِ, those people who join what Allah has commanded. And يُوصَلَ وَيَخْشَوْنَ رَبَّهُمْ, they fear their Lord. وَيَخَافُونَ سُوءَ الْحِسَابِ, they fear a terrible reckoning. So it's layer upon layer upon layer of obligation and consequence and sanction. And this joining here, except for the sake of argument, there are reasons why this is talking about joining of ties of kinship, but accept it for the moment. I know the wording isn't clear here. It doesn't say joining ties of kinship, but accept it for the moment for the sake of argument here. There's an explanation from Tafasir as to why this does mean joining ties of kinship. And then we have the message that they will have the reward. So again, what does it mean when you are told that أُولَٰئِكَ لَهُمْ أُقْبَى الدَّارِ, they will have an excellent, everlasting home? What does that conjure up? Does it make you want to do things or not want to do things? Want to. So this is targheeb, this is raghba. This is making you drawn towards this kind of behavior. You think, well, if Allah is praising these people and He's going an excellent reward abode for them, I would like to follow the behavior here. I want to be in this group, not outside this group. So when He says, أُولَٰئِكَ لَهُمْ أُقْبَى الدَّارِ, He's saying, these are people I'm going to give the best reward in the hereafter. So you want to be in this group. Not only this, but look how He listed it. We have in here أقاموا الصلاة وأنفقوا مما رزقناهم سرا وعلانية ويدرؤون بالحسنة السيئة. We have salah here. We have spending in the way of Allah here, which is zakat, for example. They weren't first in the list. The thing that is first is what He wants you to focus upon. He wants to draw your attention to something. That's why He put it first. First, He talks about maintaining obligations, covenants with Allah, contracts, but integrity in maintaining obligations, and يَصِلُونَ مَا أَمَرَ اللَّهُ بِهِ إِن يُوصِلَ. Look how He emphasized, أَقَامُوا الصَّلَاةِ is 2 words. It doesn't say anything about يَخْشَوْنَ رَبَّهُ or أَمَرَ اللَّهُ or anything. أَقَامُوا الصَّلَاةِ, that's it. So here, the focus is all on maintaining the ties of kinship. All of the focus, the foregrounding, bringing it to the front, layering it with phrases indicating accountability, is all for the kinship. Aqamu salah is 2 words. We know that's fard, it's dealt with elsewhere. It's not important here. That's not the point. The point here is about kinship. And then look at the end of the list. وَيَدْرَؤُونَ بِالْحَسَنَةِ السَّيِّئَةِ. They return with good things which are wrong. So something wrong is done to them, they return it with good. So He's also mentioned in their behaviors that they are people who don't fight fire with fire. They don't do eent ka jawab patthar se. They are doing something which is not intuitive. Someone is wronging them and they are returning goodness to them. And this makes sense when you look at the story of Yusuf alayhi salam in the previous surah. It's fresh in your mind that you've just recited it. لا تثريب عليكم اليوم. No vengeance upon you this day. يغفر الله لكم. May Allah forgive you. He's returning harm with goodness. He's embodied it in a real surah there. And this, I won't ask you this, I will just mention this to you because these things to me, this like the Quran comes alive suddenly here. And that it really just begins to speak to you. It doesn't seem like it's text on a page at all. You imagine that when the Quran was sent down, it was inspired in the Prophet. It was wahi. It wasn't a book coming down. It was wahi. It was inspired in him. Ala qalbik, it says on your heart. And the heart has feelings. The heart has understanding. The heart is multidimensional. It doesn't just read a text. The heart has life in it. And Allah said He revealed the Quran upon the heart of the Prophet ﷺ. At times like this, the Quran just comes to life. That after giving you all these clues about what you have to do and how you have to fear Allah and maintain these kinds of kinship, He says, جَنَّاتُ عَدْنٍ يَدْخُلُونَهَا وَمَنْ صَلَحَ مِنْ آبَائِهِمْ وَأَزْوَاجِهِمْ وَذُرِّيَّاتِهِمْ وَالْمَلَائِكَةُ يَدْخُلُونَ عَلَيْهِمْ مِنْ كُلِّ بَابٍ سَلَامٌ عَلَيْكُمْ بِمَا صَبَرْتُمْ فَنِعْمَ عُقْبَى الدَّارِ. This garden, when He said أُولَٰئِكَ لَهُمْ عُقْبَى الدَّارِ, He explained it. He gave you a bit more tafsir so that you will understand what He's talking about. Jannatu adnin, gardens everlasting. Yadkhulunaha, they will enter it. Will they enter alone? When they maintain ties of kinship on this earth, and He didn't say explicitly maintain ties of kinship on this earth. He said they join what Allah has commanded to be joined. He didn't say what it was. You have to work it out from context. But what He did emphasize is that Allah has commanded it. Because if He gives you too much information, you won't have emphasis there. He didn't give you too much information. All He said to you, He gave the ta'aruf of that action is by the fact that it is an obligation from Allah. He said, أَن يُوصَلَ. He said, مَا أَمَرَ اللَّهُ بِهِ. That is the only indication we have of what we were required to do. It is something Allah has ordered. They join what Allah has ordered to be done. So the focus is on His order. But look at the context here. The people who do that, they will enter gardens everlasting. وَمَنْ صَلَحَ مِنْ آبَائِهِمْ وَأَزْوَاجِهِمْ وَذُرِّيَّاتِهِمْ. They will take with them those people who are righteous from their forefathers, their spouses, and their descendants. Families on this earth who are united will be united in Jannah. Those ties will not be broken even in paradise. Paradise is not a place to be alone enjoying its pleasures, because we're not made to be alone. Our pleasure can't be complete. So to make our pleasure complete, to make us whole, Allah will put us in there with our families. Those who are righteous from amongst the forefathers, the descendants, and the spouses. It's more than we have on earth. We have in generations there, above and below. Paradise is not about running away from people we didn't get on with in this world. It's about living with people in this world the way we should have lived with them. So He gives you the same spouse, but you'll like each other. You won't rub each other the wrong way there. You'll know how to get the best out of each other. You have the same families, but your characters will be excellent. You won't hurt each other there. You'll be the way you should have been, but you'll still be with your families and your spouses. It doesn't mean it's paradise because you lose the wife, or you lose the husband, lose the brothers who have been annoying you. It's paradise with those people, but you will all be behaving the way you should have been behaving. And that's what we're preparing for here. We have to start living in that way, that kind of behavior on this earth, the way we should be if we want to be in paradise. So look how He brought in the family context now. Not in terms of what you do on this earth, but in terms of how you'll be in heaven. It's aspirational. He's encouraging you, not asking you to look at the family relationships on this earth and see their flaws. He's asking you to look up towards the heavens and see how the families will be in Jannah and aspire to be like that now. It's aspirational.
There's incentive there.
Yes. And then, as if to complete the whole picture and just elevate you into a state where your heart is singing and you are desperate and longing for that state, He says, وَالْمَلَائِكَةُ يَدْخُلُونَ عَلَيْهِمْ مِنْ كُلِّ بَابٍ. Now you are in paradise, the family is with you, عَلَيْهِمْ, all of them now, He put them all into the collective. He says, وَالْمَلَائِكَةُ يَدْخُلُونَ عَلَيْهِمْ. The angels will enter upon all of them, عَلَيْهِمْ, the whole family now. Min kulli bab, from every door, meaning from all around, and they will be saying what? Salamun alaykum, peace be upon you, bima sabartum, for the sabr of this world. The sabr is not from Jannah. The reward is in Jannah. The sabr is here. Action is here, the reward is in Jannah. The sabr here, being steadfast on what you know to be right, even if everyone else is going in a different direction and the situation is taking you in a different direction. Being steadfast, that is sabr. You do what you know to be right, no matter how people treat you, no matter what events unfold before you. You behave the way Allah expects you to behave. That is the sabr. بِمَا صَبَرْتُمْ فَنِعْمَ عُقْبَى الدَّارِ. How wonderful is the abode of the akhirah. And then to balance this, as if it wasn't clear, He said, وَالَّذِينَ يَنْقُضُونَ عَهْدَ اللَّهِ مِنْ بَعْدِ مِيثَاقِهِ. Those people who break their covenant with Allah. Breaking a covenant with Allah is not a light matter. It doesn't sound like a trivial matter. مِنْ بَعْدِ مِيثَاقِهِ, after having contracted it. وَيَقْطَعُونَ, and they are the same people who break their covenants with Allah, the same people who cut. يَقْطَعُونَ مَا أَمَرَ اللَّهُ بِهِ أَنْ يُوصَلَ. They cut what Allah has commanded to be joined. Allah said join it and they cut it. These are people who break their covenant with Allah. So take it seriously, because it's given gravity by that mention of the covenant with Allah. وَيُفْسِدُ فِي الْأَرْضِ وَيُفْسِدُونَ فِي الْأَرْضِ. They create fasad in the earth. Is He praising them? Or is He criticizing them? When He said, وَيُفْسِدُونَ فِي الْأَرْضِ, they create corruption in the land. Corruption means something which is unnatural. When you corrupt it from its proper state. Allah commanded you to join it, and you corrupted it, you created fasad. And then, as a contrast, and this is another technique of the Quran uses contrast to heighten its message. There you had Jannah, there you had angels, there you had salam, there you had families who were strong and united. Here you have fragmentation, here you have breaking covenants with Allah, here you have fasad and corruption on the earth. To complete the whole image, you have أُولَٰئِكَ لَهُمُ اللَّعْنَةُ وَلَهُمْ سُوءُ الدَّارِ. They have la'na, they have a curse, and the curse is being deprived of the mercy of Allah, and they have a very bad home, a very bad place to end. Can we go over a little bit?
Yeah.
A few more minutes, because I started slow and late to give people a chance to come. We'll just finish, inshallah, we'll do a little bit. That passage, I mean, I find that very inspiring in the way it's expressed. Very, very eloquent, very, very rhetorical. It speaks on so many different levels. Yes, Sister Uzma?
In Ayah 53,
Yeah.
it says, with the men who are righteous, it says, وَمِن صَالِحَةٍ. So salihah is righteousness, and is that derived from salah?
Sulh.
Good.
So, salaha is to be sound. It's the opposite of fasad. So salaha means to be sound, to be correct, to be the way you should have been. So it's used, sometimes they translate it as virtuous because it means you're salih, means that you are doing the right thing. So it's not salah, it's not prayer. No, salaha means to be sound, to be correct, to be the way you should have been. If everything is in the right place, the way it should have been, that's salaha. But here it's used for وَمَنْ salaha, people who are salaha, meaning people who are the way they should have been, the way Allah created them. That's why they're righteous, because they're obeying God's command.
Who corrected themselves.
Yeah, people who are, you have the concept of islah. Apni islah karna. It means bring yourself back to how you should have been.
And there's a phrase that the heart should be sound.
The heart should be sound as well, yes. But here we have a contrast with يُفْسِدُونَ فِي الْأَرْضِ. So those are the people who are natural and correct and sound, and these are the people who are unnatural. يُفْسِدُونَ فِي الْأَرْضِ. They create corruption in the land. So there's this contrast between what should have been and what has been corrupted. That was the natural, the correct state of being. But it's a nice word and it's worth concentrating on. So just a couple of things then to finish off. So we have these three little clusters of text we've covered. We have just two more. One will be particularly quite short. We'll just close with these two topics. So Surat Al-Nahl, we have in here, verse 90, 1690, this is on towards the end of the handout. Now you have the last page. إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون. Indeed, Allah orders justice and good conduct and giving to relatives and forbids immorality and bad conduct and oppression. He admonishes you that perhaps you will be reminded. So, first of all, I'll just mention this point because we've obviously covered it before. Inna Allah ya'mur. Surely Allah. Inna is for tawqeed. It means that this is emphasized. Ya'mur. Allah surely commands. So these are things which are emphasized. Adl, ihsan, ita'i dhil qurba. And wa yanha. Allah yanha. Allah forbids, prohibits. These are things which He prohibits. Fahsha, munkar, baghi. And then ya'idukum la'allakum tadhakkarun. That Allah admonishes you so that you will be reminded, so that you will pay attention, so that you will take heed. So here, what strikes you about this verse? Not only about how important the obligation is, but also the way the obligations are mentioned in here. Because we'll move on now from where we started the discussion, because we're already going towards obligation now. But what strikes you about this verse in particular? Anything jump out at you in terms of the phraseology, the scope of the verse, the reach of the verse?
Allah orders us to do the good things all the time.
Yeah.
And the same verse it says, keep away from the other vices.
Yes. So Allah's command and prohibition,
Yeah.
good and
So
bad, balancing the two. This verse is very compact. And this is something which is mentioned in the khutbah on
on
Friday all the time. It's a very common verse which is included in the khutbah in many mosques. And it's jami', it's very comprehensive and very concise. So it's something in which you would expect only the very important things to be mentioned, and only the very high level things.
Yeah.
So this isn't going into detail here about, obviously Allah commands lots of things in the Quran. He commanded reading Salah in the Quran. It's not here. Commanded going to Hajj in the Quran.
No.
Is it here? He prohibited lots of things in the Quran. They're not all here. Eating meat which is haram. Is it mentioned here?
No.
It's all mentioned in the Quran, but it's not mentioned here. This is concise. So everything has to be fitted into these categories somehow. That what does Allah command and what does He prohibit in general? So these are number one, these are very fundamental concepts. They are very universal concepts and they are foundational concepts. Other things can be fitted into this. So for example, adl is justice. Justice means you fulfill your obligations. One of your obligations is that you should pray to Allah who has created you. So in a way, accepting the tawheed of Allah, praying to Allah is a form of justice. So each thing is not spelled out, but it is implied within these categories. These are generic encompassing terms. Adl, ihsan, ita'i dhil qurba. Within all of Allah's commandments here are summarized in three terms. Adl, ihsan, ita'i dhil qurba. But even at this very foundational level, He mentioned ita'i dhil qurba, giving to the relatives. So it's very high level, it's very concise. Only the most important, the most foundational concepts are being highlighted here. Something which is very important, not to be missed. Within that list of 3 items that Allah has commanded, ita'i dhil qurba, give to the relatives. That when the relative asks, you don't turn them away. Because in a way you are rejecting the tie of kinship. وَيَنْهَى عَنِ الْفَحْشَاءِ وَالْمُنْكَرِ وَالْبَغْيِ. So 3 things which are commanded, 3 things which are prohibited. But one of the commands in these 3 is ita'i dhil qurba. Anyone who is near to you. Look how He called them as well here. Other times He talked about arham, yusala, joining. Sometimes He talked about the womb, sometimes He talked about joining and natural behavior. Here He called them dhil qurba. That's their quality, is that they are near. Qurba, qurb. Ishtidari. So they are near to you. So don't distance them. If they ask, then you give. Because they're near, so they have rights. So to reinforce the obligation of ita, He called them dhil qurba, that they're close to you, they're near to you. It's not just brothers and sisters here. Qurba means your relatives, so your family, the people you mix with, that maybe your cousins, your uncles, your aunts, maybe the family, what you call the family. So this is something very fundamental which is included in here, ita'i dhil qurba. So then just to finish off with the same point, really reinforced how Allah Ta'ala highlights one particular relationship of kin, which is the relationship of the parents. So this is the most fundamental of the relationships of kin. And this is how Allah Ta'ala talks about this. وَوَصَّيْنَا الْإِنسَانَ بِوَالِدَيْهِ. So وَصَّيْنَا. So again, the language here is very legal. But that's what strikes me about many of these verses, is that the language is very legal. It talks about contracts, orders, commands, decrees, sanctions, penalties. The Quran doesn't always talk like this, but here it does, and it's noticeable because it doesn't always talk like this. That's why it's noticeable. So He talked about commanding, he said, وَوَصَّيْنَا, we have enjoined. وَوَصَّيْنَا الْإِنسَانِ. He talked about insan here, not just believers, man. Meaning as a human being, this is something which Allah has ordained for you. This is humanity. This is what makes you human beings. If you don't even respect the tie that you have with your mother or your father, you're almost behaving in an inhuman way. So وَصَّيْنَا الْإِنسَانَ بِوَالِدَيْهِ. If you are humans, then you should have this bond with your parents. بِوَالِدَيْهِ حَمَلَتْهُ أُمُّهُ. Then He picked the highest example the most basic fundamental example which no one can deny. Because somebody might say, well, my mother didn't do that much. She was gone when I was 5, or she was out at work all day. Or so. So he picked something very fundamental. He said, حَمَلَتْهُ أُمُّهُ وَحْنًا عَلَى وَحْنٍ وَفِصَالُهُ فِي عَامَيْنِ. He said his mother carried him. Can't deny that. The mother carried him in weakness upon weakness, meaning that he gained strength, the child gains strength while the woman becomes weak. He takes her blood and he gets his nutrition from it. So she becomes weaker. Nutrition that should have gone to her body goes to the child's body. He literally sucks the blood. So he's showing how you benefited in the womb. And how are you going to repay that kindness? وَفِصَالُهُ فِي عَامَيْنِ. He says, and also the suckling is for 2 years. That once you start to eat food, you might think you're a little bit independent. But the suckling period, you still got nutrition from the mother. First you got it from the inside for 9 months. Then for another 2 years you got it from the outside. Maybe not 2 years nowadays. At least they have the right, so that's why it's mentioned. فِي عَامَيْنِ أَنِ اشْكُرْ لِي وَلِوَالِدَيْكَ إِلَيَّ الْمَصِيرِ. He says that you should be thankful to me and to your parents. إِلَيَّ الْمَصِيرِ. He says you're going to return to me. That's again implied sanction. When you come back to me, I'm going to remind you everything you did, how you behaved. So, إِلَيَّ الْمَصِيرِ, don't forget. And he put the two things together, always in the Quran. He put his rights and the rights of the parents together. As if to say that if you can't respect the parents who you benefited from in front of your eyes, how will you accept my favors upon you when you can't even see me? I'm ghaib. I benefit you. How will you be thankful to me when you can't thank your parents for the benefit? So he always put them together. Anishkur li wali walidayk. He put the two together. Thankful to me, thankful to your parents. And then he gave us this criterion, this way of distinguishing. وَإِنْ جَاهَدَاكَ عَلَىٰ أَن تُشْرِكَ بِي مَا لَيْسَ لَكَ بِهِ عِلْمٍ. So here, if they force you or strive to encourage you to do shirk, this is the most fundamental religious duty in the Quran, that we should have belief in one God. If there is one foundational sin in the Quran, in theological matters, it is shirk. Associating partners with Allah. So between you and Allah, the worst thing you can do is shirk in the Quran. It's the most basic sin. It says if they encourage you towards shirk, now you should expect something strong. Never see them again. Something harsh, something which reflects the gravity of what they have asked you to do. So he says, فَلَا تُطِعْهُمَا. Don't obey them in this. Don't obey them in this. Don't adhere to what they said in this, because your loyalty to Allah is first, your obedience to Allah is first. That's 2 words. فَلَا تُطِعْهُمَا. And then he says, وَصَاحِبْهُمَا فِي الدُّنْيَا مَعْرُوفًا. More than 2 words. And accompany them in this world in a way which, it says here, with appropriate kindness. Ma'rufa, meaning with what is customary, meaning what is usual, the way a child should be with a parent. In worldly matters, in this world, the relationship should continue in the way that it should be, meaning without estrangement. Meaning that because they did this, the tension shouldn't be there now. It shouldn't be the source of tension. You should still have natural relations with them. And sahib means being a companion at the side always, perpetually. So sahibhuma fi dunya ma'rufa. So you should accompany them for a long time, ma'rufa, in a way which is still maintaining good relations. Even if they asked you to do shirk, the longevity of the relationship, the quality of the relationship should still be the way that a child should be towards the parent, even after that. So that really is showing you that there is no situation, really, in which the family relationships don't apply. It's so fundamental that even if they try to oblige you towards shirk, you still maintain family ties with them. And remember, we have, in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, there were people who were being tortured by their parents. At the Sulh of Hudaybiyah, Abu Jandal, he had escaped and he came to the Prophet ﷺ, having escaped from the chains that his father had kept him in. His father was the person who was negotiating on behalf of the mushrikeen. And the treaty had not yet been signed. The treaty which said that they would be returned, people would be returned to the respective camp. And the Prophet ﷺ sent him back because it was in good faith. He sent him back. So he had to go back and endure more hardships. But the Prophet ﷺ kept his word that we are making a treaty of peace between us. And we want you to know that we are not people who break our promises. So even if we have not signed the paper yet, we will fulfill the obligation. We are people who keep our promises. And the child is being told, go back to your father. Even though he is going to torture you, but you have to still go back to your father at that time. Later on, he joined the Muslims in another context. The situation changed. But it shows the integrity of the Prophet ﷺ and how he didn't allow family ties to be broken lightly, even in extreme situations. This is what Yusuf a.s. story shows us. That this isn't just for the good times, but this is for the bad times as well. This isn't just something that we say, yeah, okay, if everyone's behaving well, then we will choose to be good to them. This is saying even when things are as bad as you can imagine that they could be, socially and theologically, in terms of them enjoining you to do shirk, or in terms of them treating you very badly in this world, this still applies. It's part of who you are as human beings. So may Allah Ta'ala give us tawfiq to act on what we have heard, and may He encourage all of us, me and you, to learn and to increase our knowledge of the Quran and to act upon it. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillah for all your participation.